Long before the seas knew a single pirate's name, one institution had already wrapped its reach around every ocean it could find. The world government is not simply an organization, it is the architecture of the One Piece world. Built upon a founding pact made 800 years ago, it holds 170 member kingdoms within its shadow. Its reach extends from the calm waters of East Blue into the depths of the New World. Within that reach lives both protection and deep secrecy. And if this helps you rest, you're welcome to subscribe for more calm One Piece stories and tell me where you're listening from tonight. As we begin with the people sent to guard the world's quieter shores and the long layered history of the greatest authority the world of One Piece has ever known. The first thing worth understanding about the world government is that it does not stand alone in the world. It depends upon an enormous military force to carry out its authority across every ocean in the known world. That force is the Marines, and their presence can be felt on nearly every island, in every harbor, at the edge of nearly every sea. It is tempting, especially for those who follow Monkey D. Luffy, on his long journey, to view the Marines as a monolithic force of antagonists standing in the way of freedom. But the truth is more complicated and, in many ways, more quietly sad. Because the Marines are not simply one thing, they are not a single uniform expression of a single belief. They are hundreds of thousands of individual human beings who put on a uniform every morning with the genuine hope of making their corner of the world a safer place. Most of them will never encounter a pirate carrying a bounty of even a modest amount. Most of them spend their days protecting fishing villages, escorting merchant ships through difficult waters, and standing watch on quiet coasts where nothing dramatic ever happens. The role of the Marines is, at its core, the protection of the 170 island kingdoms that belong to the world government. These kingdoms come in every shape and size imaginable, spread across the four great seas and the Grand Line. Some are prosperous and peaceful, known for their trade or their resources. Others are isolated and barely noticed by the rest of the world, small enough that a single marine ship is the only outside contact they receive in a given year. All of them exist under the protection of the world government's military arm, and all of them are expected to honor that arrangement in return. That arrangement involves a contribution known as the Heavenly Tribute, a payment the kingdoms make to the world nobles each year in exchange for the protection they receive and the nominal voice in certain governmental decisions that membership provides. It is a balance that on its surface resembles something like diplomacy. It carries the language of mutual agreement and shared benefit. But as the story of One Piece deepens, the true nature of that balance becomes far less comfortable to examine, and the question of who actually benefits from it begins to point in a very specific direction. Still, the Marines remain the most visible face of the world government in the daily life of the world. They are the ones who answer distress calls from threatened islands. They are the ones who arrive after disasters to maintain order. They are the ones who, for all the corruption that exists higher up the chain of command, often represent the only protection that ordinary people on remote islands have ever known or could ever hope for. There is something genuinely important in holding that tension. The knowledge that an institution can simultaneously produce genuine heroes at its base and tolerate terrible things at its summit. The story of One Piece does not let either side of that tension disappear. It holds both, and it asks the reader to sit with the discomfort of understanding that the world is rarely arranged as simply as a clear line between good and evil. Every Marine begins somewhere. For most, that beginning is as humble as any beginning could possibly be. A young person with hope and perhaps some fighting ability finds their way to a local Marine base, and those bases are scattered across every ocean, often far from anything resembling a significant port city, and they sign their name and put on their first uniform as a chore boy. The chore boy rank is exactly what it sounds like. It is not a combat rank. It is not an assignment that comes with authority or recognition or the respect of anyone above you in the hierarchy. A chore boy spends their days maintaining the base, cleaning the decks of Marine ships, cooking meals, carrying supplies, and performing whatever tasks are asked of them by the soldiers and officers who outrank them in every possible way. It is the very bottom of the structure, and it is designed to filter out those who are not truly committed before anyone takes the risk of giving them a weapon to carry. The work is unglamorous, the conditions are often difficult, and the only real reward in these early days is the knowledge that you are, at least nominally, part of something larger than yourself. For some people, that is enough. For others, it is the beginning of a slow understanding that the institution they have joined is far more complicated than they imagined. The character of Kobe is one of the most memorable examples of this humble beginning and what can grow from it. When Monkey D. Luffy first encounters him, Kobe is not even a proper Marine yet. He has been working as a cabin boy against his will on the ship of a pirate named Alvida, dreaming of the day he might join the Marines and do some genuine good in the world. His entrance into that world is unglamorous, uncertain, and entirely dependent on someone else giving him the chance to start at all. But it is the beginning of something remarkable. Kobe's journey through the Marine hierarchy, his relentless dedication, his growing strength, his willingness to confront his own limits and push past them, becomes one of the story's quietest and most persistent background narratives. A boy who was too frightened to act becomes, over time, someone the most powerful Marines in the world take seriously. After the chore boy phase, a Marine who shows some ability may be elevated to the rank of seaman recruit. This is the rank at which a Marine becomes a common soldier, the kind of person who may eventually be placed on the front lines to defend the people in their assigned territory. It is not a glamorous rank, and it carries very little in the way of individual decision-making authority. But it is the step that transforms a new recruit from a maintenance worker into someone the organization trusts, at least minimally, to carry out its defensive mission. From Seaman Recruit, the path continues upward through Seaman Apprentice and Seaman First Class, each rank carrying slightly more responsibility and slightly more trust from the officers above. These are still entirely ground-level positions, the kind occupied by the men and women who form the vast outer shell of the Marine organization. They follow orders, they protect shorelines and harbor entrances. They respond when something goes wrong. Above these common soldiers come the petty officer ranks, chief petty officer, warrant officer, and variations within those designations. And here the responsibilities begin to shift slightly toward communication and coordination, as well as direct action. A petty officer might be responsible for relaying orders to a group of lower-ranked Marines, maintaining discipline within a squad, or managing the logistical needs of a specific patrol route. The work at this level is still largely invisible from the perspective of the broader world. No songs are written about the petty officers who kept a harbor safe for a decade. No legends grow up around the warrant officers who managed the supply chains of distant Marine bases. But this work is essential to keeping the entire structure functional, the kind of work that, if it stopped, would cause the whole edifice above it to begin to crumble far faster than anyone in the comfortable upper ranks would prefer to imagine. One of the more interesting characters encountered at this level of the hierarchy is the swordswoman Tashigi, who at one point in the story serves as a Master Chief Petty Officer working directly under a Marine captain. In that role, she is effectively the second in command of the entire Marine base at Logatown, the last port before the Grand Line, and a place with enormous symbolic weight in the history of piracy in the One Piece world. Her position is one of genuine responsibility, despite her rank not yet having reached the commissioned officer tier. She commands the respect of the Marines under her, she makes operational decisions in the field, and she carries with her a very specific personal mission: the recovery of the great swords that she believes should not be in the hands of people who cannot honor them. Her story is a reminder that meaningful work and genuine conviction can be found at almost any level of the hierarchy, long before the ranks with more obvious authority are reached. The four blue seas, East Blue, West Blue, North Blue, and South Blue, tend to be staffed primarily by these lower-ranked Marines. The threats found in those seas are generally less catastrophically powerful than what waits in the Grand Line, though they are by no means trivial to the ordinary people who live in their shadow. This means that a competent petty officer in East Blue might be an effective and genuinely valued protector in their territory, while being entirely outmatched by the challenges that exist just beyond the calm belt. The system, in that sense, is calibrated to the level of danger in each region. It deploys its stronger assets where the stronger threats exist and leaves the calmer seas to Marines whose abilities are suited to calmer challenges. It is a logical arrangement. It is also one that means the ordinary people of the quieter seas never quite know whether the Marine standing between them and danger is someone who could actually handle what arrives. When a Marine earns the rank of ensign, they cross a meaningful threshold within the organization. They have entered the commissioned officer tier, the level at which the Marine institution begins to treat them as someone with genuine authority over the people below them, rather than simply as a soldier carrying out instructions from above. It is a quiet but important distinction. An ensign can give orders. An ensign's judgment about a field situation is, within certain limits, treated as authoritative. An ensign is expected to think, not merely act. And with that expectation comes a weight that the common soldier ranks do not carry in quite the same way. The weight of being responsible for outcomes rather than simply for compliance. Toshigi, once again, provides a useful lens for understanding this shift in the officer tier. At the point in the story when she is operating in the waters near the Straw Hat Pirates during the aftermath of the Ennie's Lobby arc, she has reached the rank of ensign. Her focus in that period is sharp and purposeful. She and the Marines under her command have apparently just finished dealing with a pirate group threatening a nearby island. The rank gives her more Marines under her direct command and more latitude in how she handles the situations she encounters. It also gives her the weight of knowing that when something goes wrong, the question of why it went wrong begins with her decisions. That is a different kind of burden than the one carried at lower ranks, and the story lets her feel it honestly rather than treating it as a simple upgrade. From ensign, the commissioned officer path continues upward through lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant, and lieutenant commander before arriving at the rank of captain. And it is at the captain rank that the Marine hierarchy begins to reveal something more troubling about the way it functions. Something that the story has been careful to show repeatedly and from multiple angles, so that it cannot be dismissed as a single unfortunate exception. Captains are given something that most officers below them have not had: the authority to command their own Marine base. They are placed in charge of a specific facility, a specific stretch of territory, and the people who live within it. That autonomy is substantial. A captain operates in the daily management of their base and its surrounding waters, with very limited oversight from the officers above them. For a good-natured, justice-minded officer, that autonomy is an opportunity to genuinely serve. It means the ability to build a fair and protective presence in a community, to establish trust between the Marines and the ordinary citizens who depend on them, and to make daily decisions that reflect an actual commitment to the ideals the Marine uniform is supposed to represent. There are captains like that throughout the world of One Piece, quiet and dependable figures who are simply trying to do the job well and asking very little from the world in return. But the rank of captain also exposes one of the deepest structural vulnerabilities in the entire Marine system. Because the only metric the Marine hierarchy truly values, the thing that moves people upward through the ranks more reliably than anything else, is combat strength. A person who can prove themselves in battle will generally rise, regardless of whether their moral character matches their fighting capability. This is not a flaw that appears only occasionally. It is a flaw that appears consistently enough throughout the story to constitute a pattern, a systemic problem built into the structure itself rather than a series of individual failures. And the captain rank is where that flaw becomes most directly visible in its harm. The very first Marine captain encountered in the main story makes this impossible to ignore. This officer, the head of the 153rd Marine Branch, is genuinely cruel in a way that feels entirely mundane. He taxes the villagers in his surrounding area far beyond anything reasonable. He executes people for the offense of speaking disrespectfully to his own son. He builds large statues of himself simply to satisfy his vanity and demonstrate his untouchable position. And yet, within the Marine hierarchy, he holds a position of real authority over both the soldiers beneath him and the civilians around him. His combat abilities are sufficient to keep him where he is. The system, by its own internal logic, has done exactly what it was designed to do. It has placed a strong fighter in a position of authority. That the fighter in question uses that authority to torment the people he is supposed to protect is, within the system's framework, not immediately anyone's problem to solve. This is not an isolated incident, and the story takes care to make that clear. Another captain, encountered when the narrative arrives at the island that is home to the village of a certain young woman with orange hair who would later sail under the straw hat flag, accepts a bribe from a powerful criminal and simply abandons the villagers who needed protection. He takes the money and looks the other way. The people who needed him most are left to suffer the consequences of his cowardice for years before anyone with the power to help them actually arrives. These examples are not presented as extraordinary. They feel ordinary, the kind of thing that happens throughout the world of One Piece on a regular basis. In places where no remarkable pirate happens to be passing through, and therefore no one powerful enough to hold corrupt officers accountable ever appears. The quiet tragedy of the captain rank is that the corruption within it is almost invisible to the people above it, because the people above it are often busy with larger concerns, and because the victims of that corruption rarely have any meaningful voice. Above the rank of captain sits the Commodore, a rank that carries many of the same practical duties as captain, but with a broader scope of authority, and in some cases, specialized responsibilities that go beyond the standard territory of patrol and protection. Commodores are not the most dramatic tier of the Marine hierarchy. They do not carry the mythological weight of the Admirals or the complex moral dimensions of the Vice Admirals. They are, in a sense, elevated captains, experienced enough to have risen beyond the common officer tier, but not yet possessing the individual power or the reputation that would bring them into direct engagement with the most significant threats in the world. One of the more distinctive specialized Commodore duties that the story touches on involves the assignment and management of bounties for pirates throughout the world. This administrative and evaluative function, deciding how seriously the world government treats any given pirate, translating their known actions and presumed danger into a specific number that every Marine in every ocean will use to calibrate their response, passes through certain Commodore-level officers. The bounty system is, in its way, one of the world government's most elegant instruments of control. It transforms the threat assessment of dangerous individuals into a public number that functions simultaneously as a warning, a motivation, and a kind of accidental celebrity. Pirates whose bounties rise high enough become famous. That fame can be useful. It attracts attention. It brings in bounty hunters. It creates enemies. But it also creates a very specific kind of legend, and the world government has occasionally had to reckon with the way legends do not always serve the purposes they were intended to serve. The rank of Commodore also tends to represent a ceiling of meaningful authority in the calmer blue seas. A well-placed Commodore in East Blue or West Blue can have real influence over a broad region, more influence, in practical terms, than many higher-ranked officers whose attention is directed toward the more dangerous waters of the Grand Line. But in the Grand Line itself, a Commodore occupies a position where their combat strength is not yet considered reliable for direct engagement with the most serious threats. Their value there is more about coordination and command structure than personal fighting power. There is a sense, watching certain Commodores navigate their careers in the story, that the rank functions as a kind of proving ground, a space where officers who are talented enough to eventually rise further can demonstrate their readiness while building the reputation and the relationships that will support their advancement. The system is aware that not everyone rises at the same pace, and the Commodore rank creates enough room between captain and the genuinely elite tiers that individuals have space to develop at something close to their own rate. The rank of Rear Admiral represents a genuine shift in what the Marine organization expects from an individual in its service. By this point in the hierarchy, a Marine is no longer simply a good soldier or a competent officer. They are expected to be a fighter of real consequence, someone who can hold their own against the kind of threat that the Grand Line produces with regularity, and that would overwhelm anyone below a certain threshold of personal power. The gap between a skilled captain and a rear admiral is not always obvious from the outside, but it is significant in practical terms. The best captains in the quieter seas are considered strong by the standards of their region. But the Grand Line operates on a different scale, and a marine structure reflects that difference carefully. A rear admiral is expected to enter genuinely dangerous waters and emerge having done something meaningful, not just surviving, but affecting the outcome of whatever conflict they entered. The combination of personal fighting ability and leadership responsibility at this rank creates a particular kind of Marine. These are officers who have survived long enough and tested themselves against serious enough opposition to have developed the kind of judgment that comes only from actual experience. They carry themselves differently from the lower ranking officers. There is a quietness to the confidence of most rear admirals, not arrogance, but the settled certainty of people who have faced very difficult things and found that they were sufficient to the challenge. One particular rear admiral worth noticing is a woman whose efficiency in pursuing and engaging dangerous targets marks her as someone who takes the mission seriously in a way that leaves little room for anything else. Her presence in the story is brief but pointed, a reminder that the elite ranks of the Marines are not occupied exclusively by any one kind of person, and that the qualities the organization values at its upper tiers are as likely to emerge in one individual as another, regardless of background or appearance or origin. Another notable figure at the Rear Admiral level appears in the more recent chapters of the manga, a Marine with an ability rooted in clay manipulation who commands one of the most strategically significant Marine bases in the world. The location of that base, positioned close to the territories traditionally occupied by the most powerful pirates in the current era, tells you something important about what the Rear Admiral rank is trusted to do. These are officers placed at the edges of the world's most dangerous regions, expected to maintain a presence where maintaining a presence is, by any reasonable standard, extremely difficult. The Vice Admiral rank is one of the most populated elite tiers in the entire Marine organization, and the number of known Vice Admirals reflects the role they are designed to serve in the overall structure. These are the reliable, battle-proven officers who can be trusted to handle serious threats without requiring the direct deployment of the most powerful figures in the chain of command. They are, in a sense, the backbone of what the Marines can actually do in the world on a day-to-day basis. In terms of sheer presence, the Vice Admirals make their importance felt most dramatically during the war at Marineford. The confrontation centered on the attempted execution of Portgas D. Ace, son of the late pirate king Goldie. Roger. This was the most significant military conflict in the recent history of the One Piece world, and it brought together the most powerful assembly of Marines that the story had shown to that point. The Vice Admirals were the largest group of elite fighters on the Marine side, and they were not there as decoration. Several of them engaged directly with some of the most powerful pirates in the world during that battle and acquitted themselves in ways that reinforced the respect the rank commands. Not all of them emerged from Marineford unchanged. The scale of what they witnessed, the cost of what was lost on both sides, and the weight of what the battle ultimately accomplished or failed to accomplish left marks that several of these characters carry for the remainder of their appearances in the story. One of the most important things to understand about the Vice Admiral rank is the role it plays in the hierarchy's relationship with Haki, the invisible power that underlies the most significant combat in the One Piece world. It is stated within the story that all vice admirals possess hockey. This requirement is significant because hockey is not a common ability. It demands the kind of development and discipline that most people who spend their lives around fighting never quite manage to achieve. The requirement for hockey means that reaching the vice admiral rank is not simply a matter of seniority or political calculation. It demands genuine strength of a specific and demanding kind. Vice Admiral Garp stands as the most famous individual who has spent meaningful time at this level of the hierarchy. The hero of the Marines, as he is widely known, is a figure of almost mythological status within the organization, and, in certain ways, within the broader world. His strength is widely acknowledged as being on a level that rivals or exceeds the admirals themselves, a judgment the story supports through his history of direct confrontations with Goldie, Roger, and with the Whitebeard pirates, and the outcomes of those encounters. The fact that Garp never sought the rank of admiral, that he declined it actively, despite being offered it, is treated within the story as one of the more quietly fascinating choices any Marine officer has ever made. It speaks to something particular about his character, his relationship with the institution, and his understanding of what kind of freedom he needed to preserve within the system to remain the person he intended to be. He would not have been Garp as an admiral, and Garp, in his own particular way, had no interest in being anyone other than Garp. Vice Admiral Tsuru brings a different dimension to the rank, one built less on raw combat power and more on wisdom, strategic intelligence, and a patience for pursuing the truth of difficult situations that seems to have no bottom. Her reputation within the Marine organization is formidable, and the respect that senior Marines afford her is the kind usually reserved for people who have spent decades making difficult decisions under enormous pressure and gotten most of them right. She is a reminder that the elite tiers of the Marines contain more than one way of being indispensable. Monkey D. Garp's long career at the Vice Admiral level also highlights something important about the Marine organization's relationship with its most exceptional individuals. The system, for all its rigidity and all its formal structure, occasionally bends around people who are simply too valuable to be governed entirely by rank. Garp's relationship with the institution is complicated, deeply personal, and ultimately shaped by his own sense of what justice means, which does not always align perfectly with what the organization formally requires of him, and which the organization has historically chosen to accommodate rather than force into compliance. At the admiral rank, the Marine hierarchy narrows to a very small number of individuals who represent the absolute peak of what the organization's direct military force can produce. The admirals are not simply powerful fighters. They are symbols of the Marine ideal in its most extreme and most complete expression of what the world government's commitment to maintaining order looks like when it is given its fullest physical form. 3 admirals have served simultaneously at various points in the story's timeline, each distinguished by a code name derived from a color and a natural element, and each representing a distinct philosophy of justice that the Marines simultaneously celebrate and, in certain quiet respects, struggle to fully contain. The codename Aokiji, Blue Pheasant, belongs to a man whose power over ice is so comprehensive that it allows him to freeze entire portions of the ocean solid in moments. His body becomes ice. He generates cold on a scale that rewrites the geography of whatever space he occupies. He is physically enormous, deliberate in his movements, and projects a kind of weary calm that feels less like peace and more like the demeanor of someone who has seen enough of the world to have stopped expecting it to surprise him. His philosophy of justice is described within the story as lazy justice, a term that sounds dismissive until you understand what it actually means. Lazy justice, as Aokiji practices it, involves evaluating situations on a case-by-case basis and occasionally making choices that the Marine rulebook would not formally authorize. It means leaving a judgment call to the individual, to conscience, to context, to the specific weight of a specific moment, rather than applying the same rule identically regardless of circumstance. His connection to Nico Robin is one of the more quietly devastating things the story does with his character, and it illuminates his philosophy more completely than any explanation of it could. Robin had been declared a criminal as a young child, for the offense of being able to read the ancient stone writings called poneglyphs. The world government wanted her eliminated. The Marines were, in principle, obligated to comply. Aokiji encountered her. He had the power to do whatever the government required. He made a different choice, unofficial, unrecorded, imperfect in its protection, but genuine in its mercy. He told her to run. He told her to keep running. Not forever. He made no promises about forever, but for that moment and the days that followed. It was not a rescue. It was a postponement. But in the world of the One Piece story, postponements given to the right people at the right moments can change the shape of everything that follows. The Admiral known as Kizaru, Yellow Monkey in his code name, holds the power of light itself in its most physical and most immediate form. His body moves at the speed of light. He strikes at the speed of light. He covers distances that make the concept of escape essentially theoretical for anyone without the specific strength needed to actually stop him, or the specific ability to match his velocity. The distances that ordinary combat covers in seconds are covered by Kizaru in fractions of that time. His demeanor is the great paradox of his character. He speaks slowly, with a quality of genuine puzzlement about the events he is observing. He moves through catastrophic combat situations with the air of someone who is not entirely sure what all the fuss is about. He is simultaneously one of the most lethally capable individuals in the entire story, and someone who seems, in a very genuine way, to not take anything very seriously. The gap between those two qualities is wide enough to be uncomfortable. His appearance at the Subodi archipelago, where he encountered 11 pirate crews of significant power at what was supposed to be a gathering point for the strongest pirates of the next generation, established his strength more clearly than almost any previous encounter could have managed. The Straw Hat Pirates, at that point in their development, had no meaningful answer for what he was capable of. Their only option was to be separated and to survive as individuals until they could find a path forward. That is a profoundly humbling experience for a crew that had, up to that point, faced and overcome almost everything the world had placed before them. And then there is the Admiral known as Akainu, the Red Dog. His code name reflects something precise about the nature of his power and the philosophy he carries, the relentless heat of magma, which is hotter than fire and more total in its destruction. His devil fruit, the magma fruit, places him in a specific hierarchy, even among the most powerful elemental abilities in the One Piece world. Magma overwhelms. Flame. In any direct confrontation between fire and magma, the outcome has already been determined before the first exchange. But it is not Akainu's power that defines how the story uses him. It is his philosophy of justice, which he calls absolute justice. Where Aokiji was flexible and personal in his approach, and Kizaru was detached and seemingly indifferent to outcomes, Akainu is perfectly terrifyingly consistent. His philosophy does not accommodate case-by-case evaluation. It does not acknowledge nuance or context or the weight of individual conscience. It requires the complete elimination of evil, without exception, without compromise, without the possibility of a second thought. What this means in practice is something the story shows rather than simply stating. A Marine recruit who chooses to defect during the battle at Marineford, a young person horrified by what he is witnessing, unable to continue participating in something his conscience cannot support, is killed by Akainu, not as an act of rage or instability, not even as an act of particular emphasis, as a cold, consistent expression of a coherent belief. In the pursuit of eliminating evil, no deviation from the mission can be permitted, and anyone who abandons the mission has, by definition, chosen the wrong side. The death of Portgas D. Ace at Marineford is the moment in the story that most completely establishes what absolute justice costs in terms that cannot be argued with. Ace was Luffy's brother in everything that matters about brotherhood. His death is not presented as a battle loss or a strategic setback. It is presented as a grief, the kind that reshapes the person who carries it, that creates a before and an after in the life of everyone who loved him. And Akainu is the instrument of that grief, not despite his consistency, but because of it. It is worth pausing on the Admiral tier and feeling what it represents structurally in the world government's power arrangement. 3 individuals. 3 distinct philosophies of justice, each one individually capable of reshaping the outcome of a large conflict. The fact that the Marine organization holds 3 people like this in reserve, available to be deployed against any threat the world produces, functioning as the ultimate deterrent against challenges the lower ranks cannot address, communicates something very specific about the scale of power the world government is capable of projecting when it decides to do so. There is something almost impossible to fully absorb about the scale of what the Marine organization represents. Hundreds of thousands of individuals organized into a hierarchy stretching from a teenager scrubbing decks at a coastal base all the way to 3 people who can individually alter the course of an entire naval engagement involving thousands of combatants. Before you drift into sleep, you're welcome to subscribe for more calm One Piece stories. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Above the 3 admirals sits exactly one position within the Marine organization itself, the Fleet Admiral. This is the highest rank within the Marines, the officer responsible for the overall direction and strategy of the entire military force in all 4 seas and the Grand Line simultaneously. In a chain of command that spans every ocean and includes hundreds of thousands of individual human beings, the Fleet Admiral represents the final word in terms of marine operations. Sengoku, known as Sengoku the Buddha, held this position during some of the most consequential events in the story's recent history, including the lead up to and execution of the Marineford War. His Devil Fruit ability. The human fruit, model Buddha, gives him the power to transform into a massive golden figure of extraordinary physical strength, one capable of releasing shockwaves that affect an entire battlefield at once. But what the story reveals about Sengoku over time is that his value to the organization was never primarily about his combat capability. Sengoku is a strategist, a diplomat, and an organization man in the most complex sense of that phrase. He holds together an institution full of competing philosophies and enormous personalities through a combination of genuine institutional authority, the respect he has earned over decades of service, and a quiet wisdom that comes from having navigated genuinely difficult decisions under genuine pressure for a very long time. His friendship with Garp, his equal in many respects, and his complement in others, is one of the more interesting relationships in the story, and one of the most useful windows the narrative provides into the Marine hierarchy at its most human. His decision to publicly reveal the parentage of Portgas D. Ace, the fact that Ace was the biological son of the pirate king Bull D. Roger, during the events leading up to Marineford, was not made lightly or casually. Sengoku understood what it would cost. He understood that it would reshape public perception of the war, that it would complicate the institutional narrative the Marines had been constructing, and that it would change the way the story was told afterward for a very long time. He made the decision anyway, because he believed it was what honesty required, and because he understood that the kind of institutional integrity he valued could not survive being built on a suppressed truth of that magnitude. In the aftermath of Marineford, Sengoku eventually steps away from the Fleet Admiral position. His replacement is Sakazuki, formerly known by his codename Akainu, who brings the philosophy of absolute justice to the very top of the Marine hierarchy. The shift in leadership is not simply a personnel change. It represents a directional choice about what the Marine organization is going to prioritize in the years that follow. More aggressive, more uncompromising, more willing to pursue the eradication of threats at whatever collateral cost that pursuit requires. If the fleet admiral represents the highest rank within the Marines themselves, then the position of commander-in-chief represents the highest authority in the entire world government military structure, a tier above the Marine chain of command that exists to coordinate the full military and intelligence apparatus of the government as a unified whole. The individual who holds this position is Kong, a massive, imposing figure whose presence in the story is felt more through the context and implications of his role than through direct action. Kong is the person to whom the fleet admiral formally reports, the link between the Marine organization's operational chain and the civilian governmental authority represented by the world nobles and the figures above them. What the commander-in-chief position reveals about the world government's structure is important and easy to overlook. The Marines are not truly independent. They do not operate according to their own principles and their own organizational logic without any external oversight or authority. At every level, from the captain managing a rural base to the fleet admiral directing all forces across all oceans, the military arm of the world government ultimately exists in service to the interests of the people at the top of the political structure. And as the story makes increasingly and uncomfortably clear, over its long run, the people at the top of the political structure are not the democratically inclined representatives of the world's kingdoms that the organization's public face presents to the world. The public face of the world government is one thing. What sits behind it is something considerably different. One of the more unusual instruments available to the world government in its effort to maintain order throughout the dangerous seas of the One Piece world is the system known formally as the Seven Warlords of the Sea, the Shichibukai. In the original language, this arrangement represents something genuinely unusual in the logic of the organization, an official alliance between the world government and a small number of extraordinarily powerful pirates. The Warlord system works as follows. 7 pirates of exceptional strength and notoriety, individuals whose power is significant enough that pursuing them as ordinary criminals would be costly and potentially difficult, are offered a formal arrangement with the government. In exchange for their official cooperation with certain government requests and their implicit endorsement of the world government's authority, these piracy is within limits overlooked. Their bounties are frozen. They are permitted to operate in ways that would bring any other pirate into immediate and violent conflict with the Marine organization. The benefit to the world government is straightforward. 7 of the world's most powerful pirates are no longer adversaries. They are, at least nominally, assets. Their presence creates a deterrent against other dangerous figures. Their cooperation provides access to capabilities and information that the Marines themselves could not easily produce. And the symbolic weight of having powerful pirates acknowledge the government's authority is not trivial in a world where the perception of power matters enormously. The cost, however, is also real. Warlords operate with an enormous amount of latitude. Many of them use their protected status to pursue personal goals that the world government would not officially sanction, but cannot easily oppose without losing the alliance entirely. The arrangement creates a class of individuals who are simultaneously endorsed by the government and fundamentally ungovernable by it. Pirates, whose continued cooperation depends entirely on the calculation that the benefits of the arrangement still outweigh the freedom of operating outside it. Over time, the warlord system produces increasingly uncomfortable situations for the world government. Several warlords use their position to accumulate personal power in ways that eventually threaten the stability of the very arrangement that protected them. Others abandon the arrangement at strategically inconvenient moments. The system that was designed to give the government leverage over powerful individuals gradually reveals itself to have given those individuals leverage over the government as well. The eventual abolition of the warlord system, voted on during a reverie meeting with the support of certain kingdoms, represents a significant change in the world government's strategic approach. But dissolving the arrangement does not make the former warlords weaker. It simply makes them openly free again. with all the abilities they developed during their years of official protection and none of the nominal obligations. The government's gain from the system and the cost of ending it are both complicated calculations that the story does not let resolve simply. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The Marines are the visible face of the world government. They wear uniforms. They operate from known bases in known locations. Their hierarchy is broadly understood by the world, even when it is not respected. But behind the visible structure of the Marines lies something else entirely: a network of intelligence agencies whose existence is not always publicly acknowledged and whose methods are considerably less constrained than what a uniformed soldier operating within the legal framework of the Marine organization would typically be authorized to employ. These agencies are known collectively as Cipher Pol. The name refers to a series of numbered divisions, CP1 through CP8, each of which handles different kinds of intelligence work for the world government. The lower numbered divisions operate in ways that are roughly analogous to intelligence and investigative services found in most governmental structures: gathering information, monitoring potential threats, protecting government interests abroad, investigating criminal organizations. Their existence is not a secret, or at least not actively concealed from public knowledge. But the work of Cipher Pole extends well beyond standard intelligence gathering. The agencies have historically been involved in the suppression of specific individuals. Scholars who study the ancient stone writings known as poneglyphs, researchers who have begun to piece together fragments of the void century, anyone whose pursuit of knowledge has brought them close enough to the world government's protected secrets to represent a genuine threat to those secrets remaining protected. The methods used in that suppression are not constrained by the procedural requirements that bind the Marine organization. Cipher Pol agents do not need to arrest their targets and bring them before the justice system at Eni's lobby. They do not need to establish guilt through any recognized legal process. Their authority, as the story makes clear, extends to the permanent elimination of anyone the government decides represents an unacceptable risk to its interests and its information. The training required to become an effective Cipher Pol agent is extensive, and from what the story reveals about it, deeply dehumanizing in several important respects. Agents are taught to eliminate the kind of emotional vulnerability that makes human beings hesitate in difficult situations. They are expected to prioritize the mission above all personal attachments, family, friendship, the kind of loyalty that grows naturally between people who share dangerous work. They are trained to be capable of violence in contexts that are far removed from the open battlefield, and to execute that violence without the moral framework that most people rely on to make sense of what they are doing. One of the more troubling aspects of the Cipher Pol system is the way it handles the development of agents over time, and specifically, the way it handles individuals it wants to shape from a young age. The story touches on this through certain characters whose childhoods were defined, and in some cases destroyed, by the government's interest in cultivating a very specific kind of loyalty. Not loyalty built on genuine belief in justice or in the rightness of what the government represents, but loyalty built on the systematic elimination of any alternative framework for understanding the world. The resulting agents are effective. In direct combat, they are formidable. In the execution of covert operations, they are reliable in ways that openly uniformed soldiers simply are not. But there is a sadness to some of them, a quality the story is honest about when it takes the time to show the people behind the training, that reflects what was sacrificed to make them what they are. The division known as CP9 introduced one of the most consequential story arcs in the entire narrative of One Piece, and it did so by presenting a specific kind of government agency that had not previously been visible in the story's world. Unlike the publicly acknowledged divisions of Cipher Pol, CP9 was presented by the world government as something that simply did not exist, a division so classified that the government could use it while officially denying it, a layer of authority and capability with no public accountability whatsoever. What this means in practice is that CP9 agents operate under what amounts to a license to kill. They are authorized to eliminate any target the government designates, acquire any asset the government requires, and take any action deemed necessary. Without the limitations that apply to Marine officers who work within a publicly visible legal framework and are, at least in theory, subject to public scrutiny. The moral weight of this arrangement is something the story does not look away from. It shows what the license means in practice, not as an abstract governmental power, but as a thing that specific people use against other specific people, with specific consequences that land on specific individuals who did not choose the circumstances that made them targets. The members of CP9 encountered during the Enies Lobby arc each carry mastery of a martial arts system called the Six Powers, a set of techniques that allow the human body to exceed its normal physical limitations in specific and dramatic ways. The ability to move at speeds that blur vision, the ability to strike with force far beyond what ordinary human musculature can generate, the ability to harden the body against impacts in ways that make ordinary attacks essentially ineffective, combined with the individual devil fruit abilities that several of these agents also possess. The result is a group of fighters who present genuine challenges even to the most experienced opponents. Their operation in Water 7, the great island city famous throughout the One Piece world for the quality of its shipbuilding tradition, is directed at two specific objectives: an ancient blueprint that relates to one of the legendary weapons from the Void Century era, and a scholar whose particular ability makes her simultaneously one of the most valuable and most dangerous people alive from the government's perspective. That scholar is Nico Robin. Her ability to read the poneglyphs, the only person alive as far as the government knows who can do so, means that she carries within her the key to the one thing the world government has most consistently worked to prevent: access to the true history of the Void Century. CP9's mission is to acquire her and deliver her to justice, where the definition of justice is the permanent silencing of that particular ability. If CP9 represented the outer boundary of what the world government was willing to officially deny, then the organization known as CP0, sometimes written as CP0, represents something that exists in a different category altogether. This is the most elite intelligence division in the entire Cipher Pole structure, staffed by individuals whose combat capabilities approach those of the Admirals themselves, and whose authority derives directly from the world nobles rather than from any part of the Marine chain of command. The visual marker of CP0 agents is distinctive and deliberate: white masks that set them apart from every other government operative and communicate their status as something categorically separate from the normal rules and the normal hierarchy. They do not report to the Fleet Admiral. They do not coordinate with Vice Admirals or seek Cipher Pol oversight. They answer to the world nobles, and in the specific arrangement of power that defines the world government, the world nobles answer, at least officially, to no one but themselves, and to the figure above them whose identity is not publicly known. The presence of CP0 agents in a given situation is a reliable signal that whatever is happening has attracted the personal attention of the highest levels of the world government. Their deployment is not a routine response to a routine threat. It is the government's way of saying that this specific situation, this person, this island, this conflict matters enough to send the most capable and most unconstrained instruments available. Their involvement in the events surrounding the conflict at Wano country reflects the degree to which the government was monitoring a situation it found politically and strategically dangerous. Wano was the territory of one of the four emperors. What happened there would reshape the balance of power in the New World, and the government's attempt to shape that outcome through agents who could move and act in ways uniformed Marines could not, reveals something about the limits of the Marine organization as an instrument of governmental will and the role that Cipher Pol plays in filling those limits. The world government's legal and judicial functions are not handled through the same channels as its military operations. For the formal processing of criminals, For the rituals of arrest and trial and sentencing that give the government's actions the appearance of lawful procedure, there exists a specific facility, an island unto itself, that serves no other purpose. That island is Eni's Lobby, and its formal designation is the Island of Justice. It occupies a position at the point where two vast bodies of water converge, a geographic peculiarity so pronounced that the waterfalls on either side of it seem to defy natural logic, falling continuously and filling the surrounding air with a roar that never entirely stops. The location feels constructed rather than natural, as though the island were placed there deliberately rather than simply existing. What happens at Eni's Lobby is nominally a legal process. Criminals delivered to the island are processed through its courts, their cases formally examined, and their fates formally determined. In practice, the process is not designed to produce fair or genuinely considered outcomes. Eni's Lobby is not an institution of jurisprudence in any meaningful sense. It is a processing facility, a place where people go in and outcomes come out. And the outcomes are, with very few exceptions, predetermined by the interests of the organization running the proceedings. The flag that flies over Eni's Lobby carries something unusual. The sky above the island is always bright, the sun always visible, day or night, regardless of the weather conditions surrounding it. This detail is not fully explained by the story, but it contributes to the island's atmosphere of something profoundly wrong operating beneath a carefully maintained surface of procedural normalcy. The world outside has weather, has seasons, has the ordinary rhythms of light and dark. Eni's Lobby does not. The gates of justice, the massive pair of doors that separate Eni's Lobby from the waters beyond and from the facilities to which criminals are ultimately delivered, are one of the most visually significant structures in the entire One Piece world. 3 gates of justice exist in total, and they connect the world's most significant governmental facilities, Eni's Lobby, Impel Down, and Marine Headquarters. When those gates open, nothing the world government has sent through them has ever come back. The Straw Hat Pirates' assault on Eni's Lobby, driven entirely by Luffy's determination to recover Nico Robin before she was taken through those gates to somewhere beyond their reach, is one of the most important events in the entire story. It is the moment when the Straw Hats stopped being a small crew accumulating adventure and became something the world government had to treat as a genuine strategic concern. The act of declaring war on the world government, which is what the destruction of the world government flag amounts to, and which Robin's own declaration of wanting to live transformed from a statement about her personal will into something the entire crew made their own, was not an accidental escalation. It was a deliberate choice, and the government's response to it, in terms of the forces it mobilized and the bounties it issued, reflects how seriously even a governmental organization of this scale takes a direct challenge to its authority and its image. If Eni's Lobby is where criminals are processed and formally judged, then Impel Down is where they are held. The underwater prison that represents the world government's most complete expression of its belief in containment as a solution to the problem of dangerous individuals. The prison's location beneath the ocean's surface is itself a statement of intent. Accessible only through channels the government controls, physically isolated from the world in ways that make intervention from outside extraordinarily difficult before even accounting for the security measures within. Built into the floor of the sea rather than standing on top of it. Every aspect of Impel Down's physical existence is designed to communicate a single message. The people sent here do not come back. The prison is organized into multiple levels, each one descending deeper beneath the ocean surface, and each one designed to be more severe than the one above it. The upper levels, where criminals of relatively lesser danger or lesser notoriety are held, are genuinely miserable by any ordinary standard of human conditions. The environment is difficult. The treatment is harsh. The possibilities for relief or comfort are extremely limited. The lower levels are something qualitatively different. The story's account of what exists in the deeper sections of Impel Down is not detailed in the way that a clinical description would be, but it is honest about the fact that these are spaces designed not merely to confine, but to break, to reduce the physical and psychological resilience of the people imprisoned there to a point where escape or resistance becomes genuinely impossible, not because the security measures prevent it, but because the person who might have attempted it no longer quite exists. Level 6 of Impel Down, the deepest accessible section, holds individuals the world government considers too dangerous to execute immediately, but too significant to place anywhere that carries even a theoretical possibility of recovery. The presence of Portgas D. Ace among the prisoners in Impel Down, held there while the government prepared the public execution that they hoped would simultaneously eliminate a threat and send a message to the pirate world, reflects how seriously the government treated the specific combination of Ace's heritage and his capabilities. Magellan, the warden of Impel Down during the period when the story engages most directly with the facility, is himself one of the more extraordinary individuals in the story's supporting cast. His command of poison, every type of poison, in quantities and applications that have no real upper limit in terms of what they can affect, makes him one of the most difficult opponents any character in the story has faced. The situation Luffy encounters upon arriving in Impel Down, intending to rescue his brother, is not simply a security challenge. It is a meeting with a force of nature that has been deliberately placed between the prison's contents and anyone who might try to access them. The successful break-in and the successful escape, which takes a group of prisoners with it, is one of the moments in the One Piece story that most clearly demonstrates the difference between what an institution is designed to prevent and what actually happens when a specific kind of determination is applied to it. Impel Down had never been broken into from the outside. It had never seen a successful escape. Both things happened within the same few days. The world government's most reliable instrument of permanent containment turned out to be somewhat less permanent than its reputation suggested. For all the visible power of the marine hierarchy and all the shadowed authority of Cipher Pol, there is a layer of the world government that sits above both and treats both as resources available for personal use. These are the world nobles, also known as the Celestial Dragons, and their relationship to the system they nominally govern is among the most unsettling aspects of the entire One Piece world, when examined honestly. The world nobles are the descendants of the 20 royal families who came together 800 years ago to found the world government. Their founding mythology describes this moment as the act that brought peace to the world, the creation of a shared governmental structure that ended whatever conflict had defined the age before it. Whether that mythology is accurate in its representation of what actually happened is one of the central questions the story has been building toward for its entire run. But the world nobles have used it for 800 years to justify an extraordinary degree of privilege, and that use has been remarkably consistent across the centuries. They live atop the Red Lion in a sacred city called Mary Geoise, where the conditions of their existence are separated entirely from the ordinary world below. They do not breathe the same air as common people. This is not a metaphor, but a literal fact about certain of their behaviors. Many of them wear glass helmets or breathing apparatuses when they venture outside their protected environment, as though the air that ordinary people breathe is beneath them in the most immediate physical sense. This is not merely affectation on the part of certain individuals. It reflects a genuine belief, held by many of the world nobles, that they are a different and categorically superior category of being from the rest of humanity. The powers available to a world noble are extraordinary in their breadth and their practical absence of limitation. They can summon an admiral to any location in the world simply by firing a specific signal pistol, and the admiral is obligated to respond, regardless of what they were doing or what they might personally think of the summons. They can acquire human beings as slaves through a trading system that the world government formally opposes in public statements while facilitating in practice. They can commit acts that would result in criminal prosecution for any other person in the world: assault, murder, robbery, kidnapping, and face no legal consequences whatsoever. The Marines are obligated to protect them from any retaliation or consequences those acts might otherwise produce. Cipher Pol is available to serve their specific interests and requests. The entire military and intelligence apparatus of the most powerful governmental structure in the world exists partly to ensure that the people at the very top of it can continue to do whatever they want without consequence. The first extended encounter the story provides with an actual world noble, a member of the Don Quixote family, encountered by the Straw Hats at the Saboti archipelago, is deliberately constructed to be deeply uncomfortable. Here is a person who has been given every material advantage the world can produce, protected by the most powerful military force that exists, operating in a space where no rule applies to them and every rule applies to everyone around them. And what they do with all of that is behave with a casual cruelty that has no visible floor. The specific moment when this individual shoots a fishman for getting too close, not in response to a threat, not out of fear, simply because the world noble was briefly inconvenienced and has never encountered any reason to control an impulse, is not presented by the story as an exceptional or dramatic event. It is presented as an ordinary Tuesday for the person committing it. That choice by the storyteller communicates something that a more dramatic presentation would not. This is not special cruelty. This is what this is. The harm the world noble system causes extends far beyond the direct actions of individual nobles. The existence of the system itself corrupts the entire logic of justice throughout the world government. When the law explicitly exempts a specific class of person from its reach, when there are things that are legal for one person and criminal for another based solely on ancestry, the concept of law is no longer about fairness in any meaningful sense. It becomes about power, about who has it, who is subject to it, and who decides where the line is drawn. The city that the world nobles call home sits at the summit of the Red Line, the single continuous landmass that circles the entire world of One Piece and serves as the physical barrier dividing the Grand Line from the rest of the oceans. Mary Geoise is ancient. Its foundations are as old as the world government itself, and some of the structures within its walls may predate even the founding moment by a considerable margin. Access to the Holy Land is carefully controlled, and the kinds of activities permitted within its boundaries are governed by the preferences and the needs of the world nobles who live there. Pirates are not welcome. Criminals and those with large bounties are not welcome. The representatives of the 170 member kingdoms permitted to travel to Mary Geoise to participate in the gathering called the Reverie enter the city as guests, operating under carefully managed conditions that ensure the world nobles are never genuinely inconvenienced by their presence. The Reverie itself is one of the more significant recurring events in the political structure of the world government. Every 4 years, delegates from all member kingdoms are permitted to travel to Mary Geoise and participate in formal discussions of matters affecting the broader world. In principle, this is the democratic element of the world government, the mechanism through which the voices of 170 different societies and peoples can be heard by the organization's leadership. In practice, the Reverie is a carefully staged performance of consensus. The discussions that take place are real enough. Genuine concerns are raised, and occasionally, genuine changes result from them. The abolition of the Warlord system was a Reverie decision, but the framework within which those discussions occur is designed to produce certain kinds of outcomes rather than genuinely open deliberation. The truly consequential decisions, the ones that determine the world government's direction at the level that actually reshapes the world, are not made in the Reverie chambers. The most significant hidden element of Mary Geoise, one the story has revealed but not yet fully explained, is the existence of a massive straw hat stored in a deep sealed vault beneath the Holy Land. The hat is enormous. It is ancient, and it is clearly connected to the mystery of Joy Boy and the period of the Void Century that the world government has spent 800 years trying to suppress. What the world nobles have done with it, what they believe it represents, and why they keep it rather than destroying it are questions the story has not yet answered. But its presence there, at the physical center of everything the world government was built upon, maintained through all 800 years of the government's existence, suggests something deeply important about the relationship between the world government's founders and the figure it spent those 800 years trying to erase from history. They kept the hat. Whatever the reasons for that decision, it was deliberate. Every member kingdom of the world government pays a price for its membership. That price is not simply the obligation to follow the government's rules, to maintain certain standards of governance within their borders, or to provide military cooperation when requested. It is a material tribute, a regular payment of wealth directed specifically and entirely to the world nobles at the top of the hierarchy. This payment is called the heavenly tribute, and it is one of the most economically significant facts about the One Piece world. The 170 member kingdoms are required to transfer a portion of their wealth to Mary Geoise on a regular basis. This requirement does not scale meaningfully with the wealth of the kingdom paying it. It does not consider whether a kingdom has recently experienced disaster or economic hardship. It does not adjust based on whether the kingdom has actually received meaningful protection or benefit from its government membership in a given period. The world nobles use the tribute to fund the extraordinary lifestyle that characterizes their existence in Mary Geoise, the slaves, the construction projects, the personal indulgences. But the tribute also funds the broader infrastructure of the world government, the marine organization, the intelligence services, the administrative apparatus that keeps the whole structure functioning. The tribute is, in the most fundamental sense, the economic foundation on which the entire world government rests. What makes the tribute particularly troubling is the context in which it is collected. The member kingdoms have no meaningful ability to refuse payment. The consequences for withholding tribute or attempting to leave the world government range from economic and diplomatic pressure to direct military force. The story has provided at least one example of a kingdom whose existence was essentially erased, removed from maps, from official records, from public acknowledgement, as a consequence of actions taken by its representative at a reverie meeting. The message sent by that erasure is designed to be impossible to misread. The heavenly tribute is one of the reasons that Revolutionary Army's stated mission is specifically and carefully targeted at the world nobles rather than at the Marines or the broader governmental structure. Dragon and his followers are not opponents of the concept of a world government or a shared military defense. They are opponents of the specific class of people whose inherited privilege sits at the top of the structure, and the tribute is a material expression of that privilege, concrete and tangible, and impossible to mistake for anything other than what it is. For most of the story's exploration of the world government, the world nobles exist as an essentially unchallengeable class. They are protected, privileged, exempt from consequence. The idea that there might be any mechanism for holding them accountable to any standard whatsoever, even a standard they have set for themselves, seems almost paradoxical given everything the story has shown about how they operate. But in the more recent chapters of the manga, a new group has been introduced that complicates this picture in a significant way. This group is called the Holy Knights, and what distinguishes them from every other world noble affiliated body is that their authority extends, under certain circumstances, to disciplining other world nobles. The Holy Knights are made up of world nobles who have taken on a specific enforcement role within their own class. They are not accountable to the Marine hierarchy. They are not subject to Cipher Pol oversight or direction. Their authority comes from within the world noble structure itself, from whatever internal rules and agreements govern the behavior of the people who sit at the very top of the world government. They police themselves, in other words. And the story's presentation of this suggests that the policing, while real, serves specific interests and responds to specific kinds of violations rather than representing a general commitment to accountability. The most striking thing the story reveals about the Holy Knights is that they are capable of using lethal force against their own. The image of a holy knight acting against another world noble, someone who, by every rule the rest of the world operates under, should be entirely untouchable disrupts the established logic in a meaningful way. It suggests that even within the most privileged class in the world, there are specific lines that carry consequences if crossed. What those lines are, who decides where they are drawn, and whose interests the Holy Knights ultimately serve, remain questions the final saga of One Piece has not yet fully answered. But the existence of the Holy Knights points towards something more deliberately controlled and more internally structured at the very top of the world government's hierarchy. A system that has more layers than even the most comprehensive external view can easily account for. Above the world nobles as a general class, and above even the specialized authority of the Holy Knights, sit 5 individuals whose combined authority represents the closest thing the world government has ever officially acknowledged to a governing council. These 5 are known as the Gorosei, a name that translates roughly to 5 elder stars, and their presence in the story has always carried a weight that extends far beyond what their unassuming appearances might suggest to a casual observer. The Gorosei are 5 old men. They sit together in rooms with enormous windows and simple furniture. They wear clothing that does not mark them as military or official in any dramatic way. They look in certain lights, like scholars gathered to discuss a problem, or like elders from a prosperous village somewhere, something that suggests approachability and even ordinariness. The contrast between how they appear and what they actually represent is one of the more deliberately crafted visual and narrative choices the story has made about them. Because the Gorosei are not ordinary, they are the individuals who direct the full military and intelligence apparatus of the world government. An admiral operates with the authority the Gorosei grant. Cipher Pol executes the missions the Gorosei authorize. The entire marine hierarchy, from the fleet admiral down to the youngest seaman recruit scrubbing a deck at a remote coastal base, ultimately operates within a framework that the Gorosei have defined and that the Gorosei can, at their discretion, redefine. What they do with that authority, specifically their relationship to the Void Century and to the poneglyphs that record its history, defines them most completely in terms of the story's deepest concerns. The Gorosei have used the full power of the world government for 800 years to prevent the truth of the Void Century from becoming public knowledge. Scholars who study the period are eliminated. Anyone who demonstrates the ability to read the ancient script is treated as an existential threat, rather than as an academic curiosity. The elimination of scholars is not a metaphorical description. The entire civilization of scholars based on the island of Ohara, a community of archaeologists who had dedicated their lives to understanding the world's true history, was destroyed at the Gorosei's direction, and Buster Call was ordered, the deployment of marine forces sufficient to eliminate not just a target, but an entire island, including everyone on it, because the research being done there was judged to represent an unacceptable risk to the secrets the Gorosei had spent 800 years protecting. Nico Robin's survival of the destruction of Ohara, as a child, alone, carrying the guilt of being the only person from that community to escape, is a direct consequence of the Gorosei's decision. She has spent the years since in a world that wants her dead because she carries the ability to read the one category of writing that the 5 old men in that room have decided the world must never understand. Their names and their specific official duties within the governmental structure were revealed significantly later in the manga than their first appearances, a deliberate withholding of information that reflects the story's interest in maintaining mystery around these figures for as long as the narrative could sustain it. When those names and duties were revealed, they added dimension to characters who had previously existed primarily as symbols of institutional authority and something darker. The question of how old the Gorosei truly are has not been definitively settled. The intimacy with which they discuss historical events from the Void Century era, the familiarity of their references, the absence of any sense that they are speaking about received history rather than lived experience, raises questions about the normal limits of human lifespan that the story has not yet fully addressed. What the recent chapters of the manga have made clear is that they are not simply powerful politicians or administrators. They possess abilities, physical capabilities, that connect them to aspects of the One Piece world's deepest mysteries, and that transform them from a governing body into something that feels considerably more ancient and considerably more deliberate than mere governance could explain. For most of the One Piece story's run, the five elders function as the apparent summit of the world government's power structure. An engaged reader following the story closely could be forgiven for a very long time for assuming that the Gorosei represent the final layer, that above them, the chain of authority simply ends with five old men who have been running the world for longer than any ordinary person's memory could reach. And then, in chapter 906 of the manga, the story opens a door that changes the entire architecture of what came before it. The individual revealed in that chapter is known only as Imu. There is no public acknowledgement of this person's existence anywhere in the world government's official structure. There is no title that appears in any document. There is no formal position that any of the 170 member kingdoms' representatives would recognize. The governmental structure that presents itself to the world as a council of shared authority makes no reference to Imu at all. And yet, when Imu enters the room where the five elders are gathered, five of the most powerful and consequential individuals in the known world, they bow down, completely, silently, without any visible reluctance or complexity. The people who direct the Marines, who authorize Cipher Pol operations, who have been running the apparatus of the world government since its founding, bow to this single person as though the gesture is the most natural thing in the world. What this means cannot be overstated. The entire world government, with its hundreds of thousands of soldiers and agents, its 170 member kingdoms, its intelligence networks, its prison systems, its courts and military fleets, all of it exists, at the most fundamental level, in service to a single individual whose identity the world does not know. The throne, known as the Empty Throne, is the symbol around which the world government's founding mythology is organized. When the 20 original kingdoms came together to form the government 800 years ago, they created a throne and agreed collectively that no single individual would ever sit upon it, that the system they were creating was a shared governance, a distribution of power among equals rather than a monarchy concentrated in one person. The empty throne is presented to the world as the proof of that commitment, displayed in Mary Geoise as the visible guarantee of the world government's founding principles. Imu sits on the empty throne, not as a ceremonial act, not as a symbolic representation of anything, as a simple physical fact, the person who actually controls everything, sitting on the seat that the world was told would always be empty. The meaning of this, that the world government's most sacred founding principle is a lie, and has apparently been a lie since the beginning, restructures everything it touches. The reverie, with its voting and its kingdom representatives and its formal discussions, becomes a performance. The principle of shared governance becomes a stage set. The democratic face of the world government becomes a carefully maintained fiction that exists not to give kingdoms genuine voice, but to manage their willingness to remain within the system and keep paying the tribute that sustains it. The actions associated with Emu's authority in the story include the erasure of kingdoms, the literal removal of a country from the world's maps and records, not military occupation, not regime change, erasure. The weapon deployed in these erasures, capable of destroying an entire island from the sky, is one of the most extreme instruments of power ever shown in the story, and it operates on Emu's authorization. The photographs that Emu is shown holding, images of Monkey D. Luffy, Princess Shirahoshi of the Mermaid Kingdom, and Nefertari Vivi of Arabasta, along with the slashed photograph of Nico Robin, suggest that Emu's attention is focused on specific individuals who represent potential threats to whatever the world government has spent 800 years protecting. These are not random targets. They are people whose existence, capabilities, or heritage connect to the deepest layers of the mystery surrounding the Void Century and Joy Boy. Who Emu is, how long Emu has been in this position, what Imu ultimately wants, and whether Imu is truly a single continuous individual or a title that has been passed down in secret. These questions are among the last major answers that the final saga of One Piece will have to provide. The Void Century is the name given to a 100-year period that falls between approximately 800 and 900 years before the present of the One Piece story. It is called the Void Century because, by the logic of official history, nothing is known about it. No historical records survive. No kingdom maintains documented traditions or written accounts from that time. The world of One Piece simply has no public memory of a full century of its own history and has been told for 800 years that this absence is simply how things are. This absence is not accidental. It is not a product of the natural degradation of records over time, or the ordinary losses that history sustains through fire and flood and the simple passage of years. The world government has actively and consistently ensured that no official record of the Void Century exists, that any historian, archaeologist, or scholar who begins to approach the truth of that time period is identified as a threat and removed from the picture before they can assemble enough of it to understand what they are looking at. What is known, pieced together from fragments that have survived the suppression, suggests that the Void Century involved a conflict on a massive scale, a war that determined the shape of the world that came after it. On one side were the forces that would eventually become the world government, the coalition of 20 kingdoms that would win the war and establish the new order. On the other side was something else entirely, a civilization of extraordinary technological sophistication and cultural achievement, whose accomplishments included technologies that the world which succeeded it is only now beginning to approximate. The things that ancient civilization possessed are genuinely staggering to contemplate in the context of the world One Piece shows. Giant functional robots of the kind that would not appear again for centuries. Energy weapons of a precision and power that current One Piece science has only recently begun to understand. Geographic and navigational knowledge so comprehensive that it makes the explorations of the current era look preliminary. A level of technological development that, had it continued uninterrupted, would have produced a world that looked entirely different from the one that the story occupies. The world government, having won its war, did not simply inherit this civilization. It dismantled it, systematically, deliberately, and with a completeness that required sustained effort over a significant period of time. The knowledge was destroyed. The infrastructure was eliminated. The world was effectively pushed back from the peak it had reached, and the people who survived the transition were left with far less than the world had possessed before the war that decided everything. Why would the winning side of a war choose to do this? The question is one that the story has been building toward for its entire length. The answer, insofar as the evidence gathered through the poneglyphs and through specific characters' understanding of the world's history, suggests one, is connected to something about the nature of the power that the ancient civilization wielded, and about a specific event or decision associated with a figure named Joy Boy that the world government has spent 800 years trying to prevent from ever being repeated. The poneglyphs are the single most significant physical legacy of the Void Century, and the single most significant problem the world government has failed to solve in 800 years. They are large stone tablets scattered across the world in locations that seem chosen for their difficulty of access, inscribed in an ancient written language, and they are essentially indestructible. The world government has never found a method to destroy a poneglyph. They simply exist, holding their information, unchanged by time and unchanged by the government's sustained effort to manage access to what they contain. For an organization that has proven itself capable of erasing entire islands, the inability to eliminate these stones is a notable limitation, one that suggests the stones may be more than simply very hard rock. The language inscribed on the poneglyphs is not readable by most people. 800 years of suppression, combined with the elimination of anyone who showed signs of learning it, means that the population of people who can read the ancient script is, at any given time, extremely small. Nico Robin is the only person known to currently possess this ability, a fact that explains, better than almost anything else in the story, why the world government has consistently treated her existence as unacceptable. There are different categories of poneglyphs. Some contain historical records, fragments of the true account of the Void Century, pieces of a story that the official record has tried to eliminate entirely. Reading these requires not just linguistic ability, but the context to understand what is being recorded and what it meant in the world it describes. Other poneglyphs contain navigational information. The road poneglyphs, 4 in total, scattered across different parts of the world, each contain a coordinate. Together, the 4 coordinates point toward a specific location somewhere in the Grand Line's most remote reaches. That location is Laugh-Tale, the island at the world's end, where Goldie Roger and his crew became the first people in living memory to reach the point where all currents end. No one since Roger's crew has managed to gather the information from all 4 road poneglyphs and navigate to Laugh-Tale. The challenge is not simply finding them, it is the danger surrounding them and the strength required to reach them. The poneglyph in the Mermaid Kingdom of Fishman Island carries particular emotional weight that distinguishes it from the others. It was written by someone carrying the title of Poseidon, not in the mythological sense, but as the designation for whoever holds the ability to communicate with and command the Sea Kings, and it is addressed to Joy Boy. It records a message of apology. Joy Boy had made a promise to the people of Fishman Island, a promise whose nature the poneglyph does not fully specify, but whose importance is made clear by the fact that someone felt compelled to write an apology for failing to keep it. An apology carved in stone, intended to last until the day someone would be able to read it. What the promise was, what prevented it from being fulfilled, and what its fulfillment would have meant for the people of Fishman Island. These questions connect to everything the story has been building toward, including the reason the world government considers the ability to read poneglyphs worth killing for. Joy Boy is not a character the reader or viewer encounters in the present of the One Piece story. He is historical, someone who lived during the Void Century, more than 900 years before Luffy set sail, who was remarkable enough in his capabilities and his commitments that the memory of him survived even the systematic erasure of everything connected to his era. What the story has preserved about Joy Boy suggests that he was someone whose relationship with the world was defined by a genuine care for its people and a genuine commitment to the promises he made to them. His failure to fulfill a specific promise to the people of Fishman Island was treated not as a breach of contract to be noted and moved past, but as a grief serious enough to warrant an apology carved into indestructible stone and sent forward through centuries to whoever would eventually be able to read it. The Sea Kings, the ancient, impossibly enormous creatures that inhabit the deepest waters and that have existed in the world for as long as any recorded history extends. Remember Joy Boy. Their awareness of him and their reaction to certain events in the present story suggests that their connection to him was not a minor or incidental thing. What that connection was and what it means for the present moment is part of the same mystery as the promise and the apology. The figure of Nika, the sun god, described in certain fragmented accounts as someone who brought freedom and laughter to the people around them, whose body moved like rubber and whose presence transformed suffering into something survivable, is revealed to be connected to Joy Boy in ways that the world government understood clearly enough to spend 800 years obscuring the connection. The devil fruit associated with Nika was tracked by the government under a deliberately misleading name. They called it the Gomu Gomu no Mi. They documented it as a rubber fruit and nothing more. The true name, the human fruit model, Nika, was kept out of public knowledge. That fruit ended up with Monkey D. Luffy, through a series of events that involves the crew of Red Hair Shanks and a box of fruit that was being transported and was subsequently taken and subsequently eaten by a 7-year-old boy who did not understand what he was eating. Whether that series of events was genuinely accidental or whether the fruit itself had some role in how it arrived, is one of those questions the story offers without immediately answering. When Luffy's devil fruit awakened, in the moment of greatest crisis, in the deepest desperation, against an opponent whose power had overwhelmed everything Luffy could bring against it in his prior forms, the transformation that occurred was the one the world government had been tracking and fearing for 800 years. The heartbeat that accompanied that transformation was recognized by Zunesha, the ancient elephant that carries the island of Zu on its back, whose memory extends back to the Void Century. And what Zunesha said in that moment was simple and complete. Joy Boy has returned. The world government has always had opponents. Pirates challenge it on the seas with varying degrees of seriousness. Individual kingdoms occasionally push back against specific demands. Powerful figures operate in the ambiguous space between official cooperation and open defiance, but none of these represent a sustained, organized, ideologically consistent challenge to the world government as a system. An opposition that has thought through what it is against, what it is for, and what would have to change for the world to be different. The Revolutionary Army does. Founded and led by Monkey D. Dragon, who is, among other notable biographical details, both the son of Vice Admiral Garp and the father of Monkey D. Luffy. The Revolutionary Army has one stated and specific mission: the overthrow of the world nobles. Not the Marines as an institution, not the intelligence services, not the concept of a world government or shared military defense. The specific target is the class of people whose inherited privilege sits at the summit of the structure and for whose benefit the entire apparatus ultimately operates. This precision in targeting is important and easy to miss. Dragon is not simply opposed to everything the world government represents. He is opposed to a specific and identifiable problem within it: the systematic harm caused by the world noble class and the tribute system that sustains their existence. The implication is that if the world nobles were removed from the top of the structure, what remained could potentially become something genuinely different and better. The Revolutionary Army is not trying to burn the world down. It is trying to change who is in charge of the part of it that most needs changing. The Revolutionary Army has spent much of the story working in ways that were not fully visible on the surface of the narrative, building its network across the world, recruiting from kingdoms that have suffered most directly under world noble governance, or that have seen their people sold into slavery, and carefully calibrating when to spend its strength on direct confrontation and when patience would serve the cause better than action. Their strategy has been one of building genuine belief rather than coerced loyalty. The members of the Revolutionary Army are not people who were pressed into service or who remain because they have no alternative. They are people who were shown the truth of the world government's nature and chose to dedicate themselves to changing it. That kind of loyalty is slower to build than compliance through force, but it is also considerably harder to break. Dragon himself is one of the most deliberately and carefully mysterious figures in the entire story. He is designated by the world government as the world's most dangerous criminal, a title that reflects not primarily what he has done, but what he represents and what he is building. The government's fear of Dragon is about the network, the ideology, and the possibility that enough people shown the truth clearly enough will eventually decide that something different is worth fighting for. His relationship with his son, Luffy, who has never expressed any particular interest in political ideology or institutional reform, is one of the story's more interesting background complications. Father and son are working from their very different angles and with their very different methods in the same general direction: the revolutionary trying to change the system, the pirate simply ignoring the system in favor of being free. What happens when those two approaches converge on the same moment is one of the questions the final saga will have to answer. Among the deepest concerns that the world government carries from the Void Century and the war that ended it are three specific instruments of destruction whose power operates on a scale that individual human strength, regardless of how exceptional, cannot match alone. These are the ancient weapons, legendary capabilities whose existence is recorded in the poneglyphs and whose manifestation in the present world represents one of the most significant strategic considerations in the story's endgame. The first ancient weapon is Pluton, a warship of such extraordinary size and destructive capability that historical records describe it as capable of destroying an entire island in a single engagement. The blueprints for Pluton's construction were held for a long period in the City of Water 7, maintained within the tradition of the great shipbuilding family that had possessed them for generations. These blueprints were a target of CP9 precisely because the world government was determined to either possess the construction specifications for Pluton or ensure that no one else could ever use them. The story's treatment of Pluton's blueprints and the decision made by the shipbuilder Iceberg about what to do with them is one of the more thoughtful explorations of the question of dangerous knowledge. If a weapon capable of destroying islands exists in blueprint form, the question of who holds the blueprint matters enormously. The world government's interest in controlling that information reflects its understanding that in the right hands, or the wrong ones, depending on where you stand, Pluton represents the kind of leverage that could fundamentally change what is possible in the world. The second ancient weapon is Poseidon, a designation for a person rather than an object, specifically for whoever is born with the rare ability to communicate with and command the Sea Kings. The current holder of this ability is Shirahoshi, the mermaid princess of Fishman Island, whose connection to the Sea Kings has been present since her birth, and whose full understanding of what she carries has developed slowly over the course of the story. Her ability to call upon the Sea Kings means that she could, at least in principle, direct a force capable of affecting the ocean itself on a scale that no conventional military could match. The third ancient weapon is Uranus, about which the story has revealed the least of the three. The name exists in records. Its nature has not been confirmed as of the most recent chapters of the manga. The pattern established by Pluton and Poseidon, one a mechanical weapon of external destruction, one an embodied ability within a specific human being, suggests that Uranus occupies its own distinct category, but what that category is remains one of the story's unanswered questions. What matters about the ancient weapons in the context of the world government is that the government is not simply trying to prevent these weapons from being used against it. Their relationship to these weapons is more complex than that. It involves the history of the war in which the ancient civilization was defeated, the question of whether those weapons were used in that war, and the fear that assembling all three in alignment with a specific purpose could produce something that the world government could not simply overwhelm with the force it has spent 800 years building. The relationship between the world government and the devil fruits is an area where the story's recent revelations have transformed what appeared, early in the narrative, to be a colorful and inventive power system into something with profound implications for the world government's deepest secrets. Devil fruits have been present in the story from its earliest chapters, mysterious fruits that appear in places throughout the world, each one carrying a unique power, each one granting that power to whoever eats it at the cost of the ability to swim. The variety of abilities encountered over the course of the story is enormous and imaginative. The Logia types transform the user into a natural element. The Paramecia types modify the user's body or their relationship with the physical world in specific ways. The Zoan types allow transformation into animals, mythological beings, and, in the most unusual cases, something in between. What the Gorosei's more recent engagement with devil fruit-related matters reveals is that the world government possesses a far more comprehensive understanding of devil fruits than it has ever shared publicly. They maintain records that the general population does not have access to. They track specific fruits and their locations with an interest that goes beyond what standard security would explain. And they use different names for specific fruits than the names those fruits carry in common knowledge. The documented case of Luffy's fruit being called by a false name being the most clearly confirmed example. The most significant theory that the story's accumulated evidence supports is that devil fruits are connected to the ancient civilization of the Void Century in ways that the world government understands and keeps quiet. Whether that connection is causal, whether devil fruits exist because of something that happened during or because of the Void Century, or historical, whether they predate the Void Century and were understood by the civilization that existed then, is still unclear. But the government's specific and intensive interest in the mythical Zoan abilities, the fruits that correspond to legendary and mythological figures, suggests that certain devil fruits represent not just power sources, but something with specific historical and perhaps prophetic significance. The classification of Luffy's fruit as a mythical Zoan, the human fruit model, Nika, and the 800 years of effort the world government spent managing and tracking it, says something about the relationship between the Void Century, the figure of Joy Boy, and the specific kind of power associated with liberation and freedom that Nika represents. The government did not simply want to suppress the knowledge that this fruit existed. They wanted to make sure that no one who ate it ever understood what they had become. There is something clarifying about stepping back and looking at the world government as a complete structure, at its full height and depth and breadth, from the young core boy at a rural base in South Blue to the secret ruler sitting on the throne that was promised to always be empty, and understanding what it represents in the context of the story that One Piece has been telling. On its surface, the world government is a governmental structure, a system of laws and courts and military force. An imperfect institution, as all human institutions inevitably are, with pockets of genuine good inside a frame that has been badly corrupted at its summit. This much has been visible since the story's first arcs, and the story has never pretended otherwise. But at its deepest level, at the level where Emu sits in the Gorosei bow, and the secrets of the Void Century are guarded with the full apparatus of the world's most powerful organization, the world government is the maintenance of a specific lie. It is 800 years of organized effort to prevent the world from knowing what happened during the century it has forgotten, who Joy Boy was and what promise he could not keep, what the ancient civilization achieved, and why it had to be destroyed. And, most fundamentally, who has actually been in charge of everything since the moment the organization was founded, and why that person has such an overwhelming interest in making sure the world never changes in any meaningful way. Roger found the answer. He reached Laugh-Tale. He read everything that was there to be read. He laughed, not from madness or despair, but from something closer to the joy of understanding, the specific relief of a truth finally assembled from its scattered pieces. He chose not to do anything with it, because as he understood the timing of things, the world was not yet ready. The person who needed to be born had not yet been born. The moment that had been waiting for 900 years had not yet arrived. He died with confidence that it would. The Revolutionary Army builds toward an answer of its own, one that involves dismantling the specific class of people whose privilege the government was built to protect, replacing their extractive authority with something that might actually reflect the interests of the world's ordinary people. Dragon believes that moment is approaching. The careful network building, the years of quiet preparation, the willingness to wait for the right time rather than spend strength prematurely, all of it has been in service to a specific moment he can see forming on the horizon. And in the middle of all of it, sailing on a ship whose crew has grown from a few people sharing a single borrowed boat to something that now includes friends and allies and bonds in every corner of the world. Bonds built not through politics or ideology, but through the simple shared experience of going into difficult places together and coming back out, is a young man with a straw hat. He has no plan. He carries no ideology. He has no detailed understanding of the governmental structure we have just spent this time exploring together. The ranks, the intelligence agencies, the tribute system, the secret ruler, the ancient weapons, the forgotten century. He does not know the full shape of what he is walking toward. He simply wants to be free, and he wants everyone around him to be free as well. He wants to find the One Piece, become king of the pirates, and live in the world his choices help to make. His ambition is enormous, and his methods are entirely personal, and somehow, despite everything the world government can bring to bear, he keeps arriving at the heart of the things the government most needs to remain protected. Perhaps this is what the world government has always feared most. Not a military force capable of matching its own, not an ideology comprehensive enough to dismantle its structure argument by argument, but a person who approaches freedom as though it is simply the most natural state of being, and who makes that case not through rhetoric or revolution, but through the specific gravity of who they are and what they do. The final saga will have to answer every question the world government's history has raised: the Void Century, Joy Boy's promise, Emu's identity and purpose, the ancient weapons and what they were designed to protect or destroy, the empty throne and the person sitting on it. The confrontation between a system built to endure forever and a young man who seems constitutionally incapable of understanding why something existing for a very long time should be treated as a reason to let it keep existing. Whatever the answer turns out to be, whatever Laugh Tale holds, whatever the One Piece is, whatever it means that Joy Boy has returned, it will have been worth the waiting. It will have been worth the long, quiet, patient journey through everything the world of One Piece has taken us to see. Thanks for sailing through these One Piece stories with me tonight. If you're ready for more, there's another calm video waiting just to the left. Let it guide you deeper into rest. You might fall asleep to something new.